Hello, I'm Victor Yalom, and I'm here today with Anastasia Piatakhina Giré. She's a psychotherapist practicing in France, working both with clients in person and has been working online for many years. And we're going to learn something today from her about working online, which is becoming necessary and critical during this COVID-19 crisis. So welcome.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for having me.
You've been a contributing writer to psychotherapy.net for several years, and I know you've done research on working online, doing online therapy. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity to kind of grab some of your expertise and share it with colleagues around the world. So obviously, with this pandemic, a lot of therapists are quickly scrambling to learn how to work online through video conferencing, broadly under the category of telehealth, but generally through some video platform. And some people have experience doing this, others don't. So let's first talk about transitioning. Say you're a typical therapist working in person. What are some things to know in making the transition to working remotely?
Yes, and transition is a really good word, I think. I'm glad that that's the one you've picked up, because it is a transition. And I've been there a few years ago when I had to try my first online session. And I know that this is, especially when we feel like we're a little, reluctant because we have to do this. It's not really out of choice, but because of the current circumstances, we have to venture into this new space. There's a lot of anxiety. So transition does mean anxiety, and actually the client might feel some anxiety about being online, especially if it's the first time for them, if they are used to seeing you in person, to be in the same room. So it's a big change, and I think it's what always pays off. It's to start with talking about it. We can always invite the client to share how he feels about being online, about this different setup, suddenly being in front of his computer in his own home and seeing you on his screen. And sometimes it can be a very small screen, because some clients will use their phones, and that can surprise suddenly to imagine that you're very tiny on their screen. So all these things can be talked about openly in that very first online session.
Right. So fortunately, that's something we're good at, is talking with the client about, what's called the here and now, about the relationship. We know that that's important. We know that it's important. The relationship's important. Some therapists may have more experience really talking about how's it going together? How's our work going? And this is a perfect opportunity to use that, from what I hear you saying. Talking to the client, how does it feel to you working online with me? How does that feel different than before? And another thing which I wanted to pick up on is you're saying anxiety about making the transition, but that's superimposed on the massive anxiety we're all feeling about this crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And, also the anxiety about the technology.
Yes.
We can feel very anxious about being cut off, to lose the client in maybe a very important moment of the conversation. So that adds a layer. And, the technology is a very versatile thing. It's actually very adaptable. And even if we lose the client because the connection is bad, it's overloaded, it's okay. And it's important to actually experience that rupture at some point, to be able to reconnect again, and see that it's okay, we can cope with that, and that coping together is really an important part of therapy, right? It's a together endeavor. So technology sometimes offers really interesting, unexpected, openings to talk about things that we would be talking usually.
All right.
Like the relationship, checking in with the client about how he feels.
Okay, there's so much of what you're saying. One I hear is we want to check in with the client about how they're doing and how they're feeling about the transition, but we also need to pay attention to how we are feeling, because we may be feeling anxious And if we're making that transition for the first time to working online, inevitably we will be feeling some anxiety about that transition. To pay attention to that, and maybe, if appropriate, to share that with the client.
They will pick up on it, of course.
That would be good modeling to say, hey, this is new for me, and there are glitches. In fact, you and I just had a couple glitches signing on today. And there may be, if everyone is jumping on the internet now, there may be some bandwidth problems. Sometimes the internet is not as good. One thing you can do is you can always switch to audio only if you're not getting a video connection. That's something I have to do sometimes.
Absolutely, and it's really good I think it's really good practice and very reassuring for the client to discuss that beforehand, to literally to not wait until something happens with the connection, but agree that if something happens, we can always switch to even WhatsApp. Why not? We have to be very creative. It's that time when we have to use anything that works, really, any technology that can do the job.
Okay. So one other thing I'm thinking about is, it seems that you have clients that you've been seeing in person for weeks, months, years, whatever, and you are wanting to encourage them to continue working with you, if appropriate, online. I think it's probably important how you communicate that to them, so that you encourage them to do it, at least give it a try, because we need to continue working, and if we suggest that in a way that shows our discomfort, that may discourage the client to continue working.
Absolutely. I think it's important to kind of share the curiosity towards this new media. It's also important to be honest, and we don't know how it will work. In my experience, it usually does work pretty well, and I think it's very reassuring for everybody to hear. But for some clients, it maybe will not work, So we have to keep open mind, and try it out.
But I think if you have experience working online, and I've done that with a few clients, and I was skeptical, as I think a lot of therapists are. I mean, we're kind of set in our ways, like most people. I was skeptical whether you could have that feeling of immediacy and vitality that you feel in the room with someone. And I was pleasantly surprised that actually, in some ways, it's extremely intimate. The client is very close to you, closer in some sense than when they're sitting 10 feet across in the room. And I've had very good experience with it. So I think if you can convey that, if you have that experience, or if you haven't, you say, look, I've heard from my colleagues that this works actually quite well. How about we give it a try and see how it goes? To set the stage, to encourage them to give it a try.
Yeah, absolutely. And here, I think many of my colleagues and myself at the beginning, we're surprised by this face-to-face immediate quality of the video conferencing. We are very close to each other in a way. Probably much closer. I'm closer to my screen than I am usually to my client, where I'm literally not even a meter away from you right now. So it can feel actually quite intimate.
Right. So we're actually making the transition from transitioning to working online to, I know, again, you've done a lot of research on this, and you're in the midst of writing a book about this. What are some, once you make that transition, what are some things you've discovered that you think are important for clinicians to know? What are some key points about working online? What are some pros? What are some cons?
Yes, I think obviously we're losing something when we transition online. There is no, client in the room. There is no access to a lot of information, but we also gain something. And I think if we really pay attention to what is behind our client's back, where is he connecting from? This is very informative. This is really a source of some amazing data.
Such as?
For example, clients, they always think about where they would sit for the session, right?
Uh-huh.
In a way, it's their way to communicate something to the therapist. It's never neutral, So inquiring into what is this space, especially when it's the first time.
I know you've written some blogs for us about that, about clients in bed, or can you think of any examples just off the top of your head of what have been some information you've gleaned from the situation where they've been?
For example, if I have a client who connects from a place that looks a little strange, like, for example, a garage,
Uh-huh.
or I had a client who was connecting from a kind of cupboard, really.
A cupboard.
Yeah, and it tells a lot about the environment, right? That maybe their lack of space, private space, lack of privacy. Or maybe it says something about their relationship with people they are living with. Can be a flatmate, can be children, parents. It's always interesting also what happens in that space during the session.
Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
For example, sometimes kids are intruding into that space. And now with the coronavirus in Europe, at least we're confined. So right now I'm in Paris and I cannot get out literally. And many clients in Europe right now are in this situation. So kids are around and they intrude. They storm in, they knock at the door, or sometimes they don't.
All right. So it gives you a lot of information that you wouldn't get otherwise if you're doing an office.
Yeah. Exactly. Clients do not bring their kids into the office.
Well, you can see, is there, sometimes I'm sure we fantasize about our clients and what their relationships are like, what their home is like. We get to see, are they very disorderly? Is it messy? Is it noisy?
And often clients, not always conscious, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously use this tool. They show us what they want to show. Mm-hmm. Right? A client can connect every time from a different room, from a different place. They literally often want to walk you through their space. And sometimes if we become aware of that, curious about this, we can inquire, we can ask them. And very often that leads to a real tour. I have clients showing me what they see out of their window. Mm-hmm. And it can be really important, actually. It means something to them. Mm-hmm. And it's an information they would never share if they were in the room with you.
And can you think of any examples of how you've been able to use that to enhance or enrich or deepen the therapy?
Yeah, of course. For example, now during the confinement, it's a really interesting situation. It's new to everybody. I have a client who I would usually see, through video conferencing, and he would always sit in the same place, and I would see a wall behind his back. Nothing very interesting.
Yes.
But this time he was confined, and actually we talked about how he felt, being closed up in this quite small space.
Yes.
And it's the first time he showed me the view out of his window. And what he saw, it's a wonderful, beautiful, blooming park with the view on the whole city. And actually, it meant a lot to him to share that. It really meant a lot for his relationship with this country because he's a foreigner living here. So, it had a real sense. It opened a door to a whole new topic for us.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're saying, we want to know about our clients, and it gives us a new window to them, just like maybe other technology, having a smartphone and photos. Clients are much more likely now to show us photos of their life than they would have 10 years ago. They wouldn't maybe make the effort to bring in paper photos, but now it's so easy to do.
Yeah,
if a client's an artist or a musician, if they show you some part of their life, that can be very meaningful in helping you understand the fullness of their being. And you're saying, seeing their space, seeing their view.
Yeah, it also shifts completely the power dynamics in a way, right, in the relationship, because they are not in our room anymore, where they are, we're comfortable, we have our books, our tissues, our water. We have, it's very comfortable for us.
So before they're in your space and you control things, and now it's some sense more egalitarian.
Absolutely, it's completely more equal, and it also gives them certainly more power. They also have to be more self-reliant in a way because they have to provide their own tissues, right, and the water. And that can feel very strange for a therapist who's so used to, be a provider of those things.
Yeah.
And control. So, sometimes there is a way of mitigating this, in those initial sessions online. We can recreate rituals in this new way. For example, sharing a cup of tea, with a client becomes often a very important ritual.
Yeah.
The clients whom I would be having tea with, others it would be coffee. And we know, depending on the time of the day. So it's a shared ritual that I think replaces in a way what we used to have.
All right. Well, these are some wonderful ideas in terms of how to transition and how to make use of the new online space. And I would hope that, well, of course, we all hope that this pandemic comes to an end as soon as possible. But I'm imagining that just like people that are forced to now telecommute, work remotely, they may think they may be less likely to go back to work at least 5 days a week in the office because companies are saying that this can work. And I imagine some therapists, after this is over, are going to continue to see some clients online. And even if they much prefer to see clients in person, that this will give them some flexibility when their clients are traveling, or if they're traveling or a client is sick, that they may now have a new tool in their toolbox, so to speak, to offer online services in addition to the traditional in-the-room therapy. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise to us. And, this technology has allowed you and I, you in Paris, me in Northern California, to have such a nice conversation. So, and I know you work with clients all over the world. In case people are wondering about your accent, I know you're originally from Russia and working in Paris and work in several languages as well. What languages do you work in?
I work in English, French, Italian, and Russian.
Wow, that's impressive. Good.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was really nice to have a chat.
Okay. All right. We'll be sharing this with our viewers and therapists around the world, hopefully today or tomorrow.
Thank you, Victor.